Good evening. We'll start our service by singing two songs, but they're going to flow right together and you'll think of them as one because they have the same tune. So we'll start with number 100 and then we'll jump back a few pages to number 93. Come, thou almighty King, give us thy name to sing. Help us to praise. Father, all glorious, o'er all victorious, come and reign over us, ancient of days. Come, thou incarnate Word, gird on thy mighty sword, our prayer attend. Come and thy people bless, and give thy word success. Spirit of holiness, on us descend. O Lord our God, to thee the highest praises be, hence evermore. Thy sovereign majesty may we in glory see, and to eternity love and adore. Christ for the world we sing, the world to Christ we bring, with loving zeal, the poor and them that mourn, the faint and overborne, sin sick and sorrow worn, whom Christ doth heal.
Well, we're thankful for your presence this evening. We are continuing our study from the book of Acts, but if you're visiting with us, we're certainly thankful that you're here with us tonight. They're having some trouble downloading our slides for tonight, so you're going to have to listen to me talk for just a minute. I'm stalling for time because slides are very important on tonight's lesson, and so if you'll bear with me just a minute, we'll introduce our lesson tonight. This is our 23rd lesson on the Apostle Paul and his missionary journeys. 2 weeks ago, when we met and I was here, Paul had just returned to Jerusalem after his third missionary journey. You may remember that in the temple he was assaulted by Jews who tried their best to kill Paul. Even tried to kill him there in the temple area, which was not something that they should have been doing in the first place, but they were going to do it anyway. So the Roman soldiers who were garrisoned in the Antonia fortress, which is adjacent to the temple area, rushed down and rescued Paul, but they also arrested him when they rescued him and took him into custody. And then Paul convinced the commander to let him address the mob. So he allowed Paul to go back down or get back down and start addressing them. And Paul started addressing them in their language, either Hebrew or Aramaic. And because he was addressing them in their language, they were very attentive to what Paul had to say. They calmed down and listened to what Paul had to say. And that's where we left him last week. He was 2 weeks ago. He was near the end of his speech in Acts chapter 22, and we're going to pick up this evening in verse 17. We'll read verses 17 through 21. And as always, I hope you'll open your Bibles as we begin our study there this evening. But what I want to do before we get started is tie in our lesson tonight with the trip that Gail and I took last week or week and a half ago on our vacation. As soon as the slides get downloaded, I'm kind of I hate to apologize like that, but I can't really, my lesson is designed around the PowerPoint this evening, and it's kind of slow downloading, but getting close, okay. Well, that'll give me some time. I'll find something else till the slide comes up. Just be patient. But we went to Harrodsburg, Kentucky, to the old Shaker village at Pleasant Hill, which is about 20 miles west of Lexington, Kentucky. We had gone there years ago on a senior citizens trip, and I tell you how long it was. James and Doc Richardson were with us, and they were with us on that trip, and it was a great trip. And Gail and I made a statement to each other. We want to go back there, and we want to spend the night in the Shaker village. They have taken and made rooms in several of the buildings there. There are no elevators, so you may be on the second floor or the third floor. I think they have a couple of rooms on the first floor, but they're in these old buildings. It's very Spartan. They do put TVs in the room. They hide them in cabinets, but it's kind of neat the way they've tried to put these facilities in these old buildings and still maintain the historical setting of the old building. So it's a neat place to go, and if you ever want to visit there, let me know, because I love to talk about it. And I've got I can't satisfy my reading on it. I bought 2 books in the bookstore there. I ordered one from Amazon, and I can't read enough about them. How people could believe that woman, Ann Lee, and believe that you couldn't have husband and wives living together. People that were married would take a vow of chastity and separate and live that way. How people could believe that foolishness, I'll just call it foolishness, and sign over their farms to the Shaker people. They would sign over all their property. And it just fascinates me. I even found, I believe it's some of Brian's relatives. He wouldn't believe me, but no. Just historically, it's a fascinating place. We've got to be getting close. One more minute, okay. What else can I say about the Shakers? One of the great things about the Shaker village is some people got together years ago, and all this land had been sold off. These buildings, although many were still standing, they were in such disrepair. Some of them had been turned into taverns, into gas stations. The old meeting house, a group of Baptists had started meeting there. It was a Baptist church, and they would not sell their building back. What they had to do, the Historical Society had to build them a new building on some other property. They had to donate the property and a new building before they would get rid of the old meeting house that the Shakers had. And this woman, bless her heart, she donated the money to do that and build them a new church building, and they vacated the old meeting house. And so they've done a lot of restoration. Now we can get started. Next slide. This is one of the buildings at Harrodsburg. This is called the Old Stone Shop. It was built in 1811, 1812. They've restored it. As you can see on the outside, it's a very beautiful, beautiful building. So many beautiful buildings there. We stayed, if you're looking at that building to the left of that, in what was known as the West Dwelling House, the old West Dwelling House. It was like a 3-story brick building, and but an enjoyable place to go visit. We spent the night there, and then after touring around the next day, we went to Lexington, and one of the places on our itinerary there in Lexington was the Lexington Cemetery. We go to weird places. We go to a lot of cemeteries. Cemeteries are fascinating. If you ever go to Hawaii, one of the best tourist places are cemeteries, just beautiful cemeteries. But here is a statue, the memorial to Henry Clay. Henry Clay, I tried to get a picture of this, but that statue goes so high, that monument, in the trees you can't see it. Now, if you're driving around Lexington at a distance, you can see it popping up above the trees. But to stand on the ground and get a picture all the way up, I could not do it. I could get just the very top of the statue I couldn't get. But anyway, Henry Clay, that's I guess the centerpiece of the cemetery there. I ought to have Doug come up and talk about history, but yeah, Henry Clay was a great statesman and attorney. He represented the House and the Senate from the state of Kentucky. He was the 7th Speaker of the House. He was the 9th Secretary of State for our nation. He was a peer of Daniel Webster and John Calhoun, so he was quite a character. He was known as the Great Compromiser in history. But anyway, there at Lexington Cemetery, the centerpiece, I guess, is the monument and burial of Henry Clay. There's also an estate there that you can visit. I didn't get to go to that. We instead went to the home of Abraham Lincoln's wife, Mary Todd Lincoln. But nearby this tomb is that of J.W. Mcgarvey. And I don't know how many of you know J.W. Mcgarvey, but you need to know who he is. How does that fit with our lesson tonight? Well, one of the classic commentaries on the book of Acts was written by J.W. Mcgarvey. And Brother Mcgarvey, I guess he's more identified with the disciples of Christ or the Christian church. However, let me tell you just a little bit about Brother Mcgarvey. He would never worship where the instrument was used. And that's really to his credit. Now, he did support the Missionary Society, which that and instrumental music were the big divisors when the churches were split in the census of 1906. Brother Mcgarvey died in 1911. Again, he was an elder in the big Christian church there in Lexington, but when they introduced the instrument, he left, and he worshiped with another congregation until he died. Another thing about Brother Mcgarvey, and I'm probably talking longer than I would have, but I just get fascinated by these people. Brother Mcgarvey was the chairman of the College of Bible it was known then as Kentucky University. Now it's the University of Kentucky. But they had a College of the Bible. I mean, years ago, state universities had these kind of things. And he was the chairman, he was the head or the president of the College of the Bible for the last 16 years of his life. I think starting in about 1895 to 1911, he was the chairman of the Bible. facing the tombstone, sadly, these old tombstones, you can't read them. And so you have to depend on others. But over here is his widow, Nancy. She was his second wife. His first wife died. And so Nancy, she died a month after Brother Mcgarvey did. And she's buried there. Brother Mcgarvey is over here. And in between is a daughter who died short of her 12th birthday. And as you know, back then, so many children died, and she was one of them. So she's buried there. And then there's a footstone, which is the next slide, I believe. This is J.W. Mcgarvey Jr. Now, what's interesting about J.W. Mcgarvey Jr., who also died on April 6, 1911, he was a gospel preacher also. And he was holding a meeting in Dyersburg, Tennessee, and died April 6, 1911. 6 months later to the date, on October 6, 1911, Brother Mcgarvey died. And then a month later, his wife died. Fascinating stuff. Maybe just to me, but Brother Mcgarvey is somebody that you really ought to know about. If you want to do any studying, like I say, classic commentary on Acts, Brother Mcgarvey is one that everybody goes to. But then there was another tombstone there. Well, there's a whole bunch of them, but another one I wanted to see, and this is a man by the name of Raccoon John Smith. Raccoon John Smith. I won't tell you how he got his name, Raccoon. But he's a very interesting character, and the reason this one is so important to me is that, I don't know, a couple of years before my maternal grandfather died, he gave me this book. It's the only religious book that I have from my grandfather, and it's a biography of Raccoon John Smith. It was kind of a fictitious biography written by a man by the name of Lewis Cochran, who did some other restoration biographies. But Raccoon John Smith was quite a character. He was born in Sullivan County, Tennessee, I believe in 1777, and he was quite a character. And I know you can't read that, so I'm going to read this thing about Raccoon John Smith. He was born in 1784. And Sullivan County is in between Kingsport and Bristol, if you want to get someplace there in northeastern Tennessee. He really only had 4 months of formal education. He did have a little bit more, but it was by a drunk teacher. And one day, while the teacher was in a drunken stupor, Raccoon John Smith put hot coals in the teacher's pants. That closed down the school, and that was the ending of any formal education for Raccoon John Smith. But one of the things he did, and it was unusual for the time, he memorized large portions of Scripture. That wasn't very common back then, but he did. And that was one of the things that fascinated people when they would hear him preach. But let me read the inscription on the tombstone, because you may not be able to read it from there. In memory of John Smith, an elder of the Church of Christ, born October 15, 1784, died February 29th, leap year, 1868. True, genial, and pious, the good loved, and all respected him. Strong through affliction and wise in the study of God's word. He gave up the creed of his fathers for the sake of that word. He was raised a Calvinist, if that helps you. He was raised a Calvinist. So he gave up that creed. By its power, he turned many from error. In the light he walked, and in its consolation he triumphantly died. In his sacrifices and service, his companion shared. She gave her life to God, and her death was precious in his sight. And then it has Nancy Smith, born November 15, 1792, died November 4th, 1861. His first wife died in 1815, so Nancy was his second bride. I think the Apostle Paul would have loved Raccoon John Smith. He would have made a good yoke fella for the Apostle Paul. Alexander Campbell was a friend of Raccoon John Smith. And Alexander Campbell had this to say about Brother Smith. John Smith is the only man that I ever knew who would have been spoiled by a college education. And that's kind of an interesting thing. I didn't mention that Brother Mcgarvey attended Bethany College. 11 years after it started, Alexander Campbell started Bethany College in 1829, and Brother Mcgarvey attended there starting in 1840. So he studied under Alexander Campbell, which probably lent itself to the good education that Brother Mcgarvey had. Now, if I've whetted your appetite for restoration history, there's a great website, www.therestorationmovement.com. Therestorationmovement.com. If you Google Raccoon John Smith, it'll take you to this Restoration Movement website. I tell you that because there are old biographies and sermons and all kinds of publications dealing with the Restoration Movement, many that are out of print, that you can download in PDF form at this website. So it's a neat website if you're interested in that stuff. Any questions before I go on? I could talk about this stuff all night. I love it. Go ahead. I'll go ahead with the class. Okay. Acts 22, beginning in verse 17. Now it happened when I returned to Jerusalem and was praying in the temple that I was in a trance and saw him saying to me, "Make haste and get out of Jerusalem quickly, for they will not receive your testimony concerning me." So I said, "Lord, they know that in every synagogue I imprison and beat those who believe on you. And when the blood of your martyr Stephen was shed, I also was standing by consenting to his death and guarding the clothes of those who were killing him. Then he said to me, 'Depart, for I will send you far from here to the Gentiles.'" Now, I'm not sure that all the people listening to Paul that day knew how long it had been since he had been away from Jerusalem. But when this vision occurred to Paul, it was about 3 years after his conversion. So he's looking back in time, and it's about 3 years after his conversion when he returned to Jerusalem for the first time. And where does he go? He goes to the temple. And what's he doing? He's praying. He's meditating there in the temple. Their argument against Paul is he's preaching against the temple. And Paul's showing, hey, look, after my conversion, first place I went when I went back to Jerusalem, when I came back to Jerusalem, was here in the temple to pray to our God, the God that we share. And so that's his point. And that accusation that he's preaching against the temple was simply false. But he comes back there and he has a vision. He has an encounter with the Lord once again. Notice they didn't jump up and scream when he said he had an encounter with the Lord. They didn't object to that. But the Lord had a message for Paul, and it was to get out of town. He said, "Paul, you need to get out of town." The Jews would not receive his testimony about Jesus. And what does Paul do? Remember when Peter had his vision in Joppa? He argued with the Lord. What did Paul do? He argues with the Lord. He said, "No, Lord, they're going to believe me. Look, I persecuted these people and did all these things." And I beat the Christians. I put them in prison. I was present when they stoned Stephen to death. I held their clothes. I was consenting to his death. Surely that kind of history would give Paul credibility to the Jews. The Lord said, no, Paul, you better get out of town. And he said, I'm sending you to the Gentiles. Verses 22 through 24. And they listened to him until this word. I love that the way that's recorded. And they listened to him until this word. What word? Gentiles. They were listening to Paul. They were hanging on. He tells about having a vision of the Lord, and they didn't say anything. But when he mentioned Gentiles, those dogs, when he mentioned that word, they went berserk. I mean, they just couldn't handle it. And then they raised their voices and said, away with such a fellow from the earth, for he's not fit to live. Not fit to live, because he said the word Gentiles. Then as they cried out and tore off their clothes and threw dust into the air, I'm going to tell you, you can read all kinds of commentators. They really don't know what all of that means. They just went berserk. But did it have some common meaning that people did that when they threw temper tantrums? No, they really don't know. But you can tell if they're tearing off their clothes and throwing dust up in the air, something, they're just going bonkers. And so the commander ordered him to be brought into the barracks and said that he should be examined under scourging so that he might know why they shouted so against him. I got to stop and look at the time. So we got about 8 more minutes, okay. Our clock's messed up in the back. If you wondered why I've had my phone out this morning and this evening, it's so I could look at the time. But the word Gentiles was the straw that broke the camel's back. Again, they just went berserk. They had accused Paul of bringing a Gentile, a man by the name of Trophimus, into the temple. And this word, the word Gentiles, just reignited their rage. So they raised their voices as they said they wanted Paul gone from the face of the earth. This man needs to be killed. We tried to kill him once. You stopped us. This man needs to be killed. He's not fit to live. And again, they just went berserk. So any hopes that the commander had of learning why there was this big hatred among the Jews of Paul, all hopes he had of finding out then were gone. And he allowed Paul to speak. I think he thought he might find out what was causing all this, but now he's lost all hope of doing that. So he ordered Paul to be brought back into the barracks and there examined by scourging. Now, scourging was the way that they would get to the bottom of the matter. I mean, if you are beating the skin and flesh off of a guy, chances are he's going to finally give up and tell. And so they said, boy, this is how we'll do it. We'll just find out. We can't find out any other way, so we'll scourge Paul. And these people hate him so much, they want him dead, so we'll have to kill him to find out why they're so mad at him. Verses 25 through 26. Any questions before I keep on?
Just one question. That tearing the clothes, was that kind of a cultural thing? Because you read about that in other places.
Well, they would do that in grief and in times of real stress. And that may be the sign there. But for a definitive event, like the throwing the dust, how do you combine tearing off the clothes and throwing dust up in the air? Some will say, well, you remember Jesus told them to shake the dust off their feet, and Paul and Barnabas did that, I believe, Barnabas. And but to put it all together, no definition. But good point. And as they bound him with thongs, Paul said to the centurion who stood by, again, that fascinates me. If somebody's about to beat me half to death, it sounds like Paul is just nonchalantly saying, can you do this? And it's just interesting the way the text reads. And as they bound him with thongs, Paul said to the centurion who stood by, is it lawful for you to scourge a man who is a Roman and uncondemned? When the centurion heard that, he went and told the commander, saying, take care what you do, for this man is a Roman. So let's get the picture. When the Roman commander said, we're going to examine this man by scourging, they didn't waste any time. They were stripping the clothes off of Paul, putting the leather straps on him, and tying him to the whipping post. And they already had a centurion in charge of this torture, this interrogation, if you will. And so Paul says, well, is it illegal for you to scourge a man who is a Roman and he is uncondemned? And the centurion quickly surmised, hey, this man is a Roman citizen. This man is a Roman citizen. We better stop what we're doing. I better tell the commander what is going on. So he rushed up and told the Roman commander to be careful because this prisoner was a Roman. Verses 27 through 29. Then the commander came and said to him, tell me, are you a Roman? He said, yes. The commander answered, with a large sum I obtained this citizenship. And Paul said, but I was born a citizen. Then immediately those who were about to examine him withdrew from him, and the commander was also afraid after he found out that he was a Roman and because he had bound him. Well, the centurion certainly got the commander's attention by letting him know that Paul was a Roman citizen. And so the commander rushes down and asks personally, Paul, are you really a Roman citizen? And he said, yeah. And so the commander says, well, look, it cost me a lot of money to become a Roman citizen. And again, commentators have a field day with this. They say, well, he said that sarcastically. I don't know that you can say he said it sarcastically. I think he was probably amazed. Look, most of us had to pay a large sum of money to become Roman citizens. That's what I had to do. And you're saying you're a Roman citizen? I thought you were a dirty Jew. And Paul said, no, I was born a Roman citizen. I've said this several times, but this is an important point of going back to Acts 21, verse 39, where Paul first encountered the Roman commander, and the Roman commander was trying to find out who he was, and Paul says, I'm a citizen of Tarsus. Remember that? He said, I'm a citizen of Tarsus. To be a citizen of Tarsus didn't mean that he was a Roman citizen. It costs money to become citizens of some of these cities, and Paul was just saying, look, if you're wondering if I'm a legitimate person, I'm a citizen of Tarsus. It was a very important city at the time. But that had nothing to do with his Roman citizenship, because you see how surprised the Roman commander is when he finds out that Paul is a Roman citizen. So kind of an important thing that we may miss in our study, but I think it's important. Let's see. Paul says, well, I was born a Roman citizen. The commander had come down to the torture chamber, and I love the way it says that then immediately those who were about to examine him withdrew. They got out of there. When they figured they were going to be associated with an unlawful scourging, they cleared the area. They didn't want to be associated any way with that. So they get out of there, and they left in fear because the text reveals that even the commander was afraid after he learned that Paul was a Roman and that he had bound him contrary to Roman law. Have we got time? I think I can fit this in. Let me just try to fit this last verse in. The next day, because he wanted to know for certain why he was accused by the Jews, he released him from his bonds. Notice that the Roman commander kept Paul bound that night. After knowing he's a Roman citizen, it was illegal for him to do that, he still kept him bound overnight. He released him from his bonds and commanded the chief priests and all their council to appear, and brought Paul down and set him before them. I think it's so interesting that he kept him bound that extra night. But the commander evidently was convinced this is a matter of Jewish law, and he convenes basically the Sanhedrin. Now, I don't know what kind of authority he had to convene the Sanhedrin. He could command Jewish citizens to come, and that's what he did. Assembled an informal meeting of the Sanhedrin so he could put Paul before them. And we'll pick up next time in chapter 23, the first 3 verses. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your comments and interest.